Now that we've gotten a pretty definitive answer, let's talk about what was going on with Yuji's arms, and then I'll be answering a few more questions from you guys as well. So, spoilers if you're not caught up with JJK. Alright, so this first question comes to us today from Isaiah, who says, were Yuji's gloves only to hide his fingers? And yes, I do think that was the main point of them. I long speculated that it was probably some form of blood manipulation, but now that doesn't seem to be the case. It does seem to be just some sort of cursed tool that he used primarily to hide the fact that he was missing a finger so that they could trick Sukuna into thinking that that 20th finger had already been spoken for insofar as Rika ate it, right? So Sukuna didn't even have to entertain the possibility that that might be used against him, which sets up the whole moment with Nobara. So whether we'll find out more about those gloves, if we call them that, and if they had any other, benefits, like if they were a cursed tool that increased his strength or something like that, probably not. I don't think it's that important. Their primary, purpose was definitely to hide the finger and kind of set up that reveal. Next, Alan asks, where is the Soul Split Katana and could it be used to split Maguna? So, Maki is still in possession of it. That is the sword she has been wielding throughout this Sukuna fight. It's the same one she stabbed him through the heart with and the one she cut off his hand with. So she presumably still has it after being, protected from the domain and swapped out by Todo. Wherever she is, I assume she still has the sword. Now, if you're talking about the original Soul Split Katana, the one we saw Toji wield, that one was just lost after his death. The one Maki is using right now is the one created by Mai. So Maki still has that one. And then could it be used to split Maguna? I don't think so, at least not in the same way that Yuji is using his dismantles to try and split the soul. I think that is a very unique thing that Yuji is capable of due to his ability to see the shape of the soul. And yes, I know Maki can see the souls of things, which is why she can even wield the Soul Split Katana, but I don't believe what she is capable of is exactly equivalent to what Yuji is capable of. So I would say maybe if Yuji was wielding the sword, then he could do something like that, but I don't think just anybody would be capable of splitting Sukuna and Megumi the way Yuji does. Next up, Josue says, you can read Hajime no Ippo, it's still ongoing. And I love Ippo. It's one of my all-time favorite animes. I watched it way back in the day. I'm not caught up on the manga at all, and I've actually never read the manga. So all I've seen was that original run of the anime. I can't remember where it ended, but they did pick it back up, and I haven't seen any of that either. But that original run of the anime, one of my all-time faves. I don't know if I'd ever cover it week to week on new releases on this channel, just because I don't know if there would be that much of an audience for it, but I do plan on catching up on the full thing at least at some point. Next up, Ahad says, do you think we'll ever get another series that'll dethrone the brain rot of Jujutsu folk? JJK is a great series, but I feel like the memes and fandom shot it to pure superstardom level, especially with guys like you breaking it down and talking about the lore. And yes, I do think there will be another series that will reach even greater heights in terms of hype, in terms of memedom, in terms of just entering the popular cultural zeitgeist. Inevitably it will happen, right? Something else will just go crazy after the time of JJK, but JJK's influence is not to be understated. It has literally been a pop culture phenomenon, mainstream, reaching levels that we very rarely have seen before, if ever, in certain aspects. But yeah, again, it's just inevitable that something else will come along and surpass it, even in those metrics. And then to answer your other question about what anime community lore series even comes close, there are definitely a lot. And I would say if we're going to specifically talk about that, JJK probably hasn't even surpassed some of the GOATs, like One Piece, Naruto, Dragon Ball. If you go out there and search for it, you can find, hundreds of channels, thousands, if not, hundreds of millions of videos talking about certain aspects of those series lore. So JJK, again, definitely made waves, especially for how young a manga it is. It's just impressive how quickly it skyrocketed. But there are definitely other series out there that have just as passionate fan bases. Next up, Outrageous Fellow points out how it looks like Sukuna could be on fire in parts of the recent panels, perhaps from Yuji's domain. And he's wondering if it could have been Yuji imbuing the furnace aspect of Shrine into the domain, or if it's just a friction burn, or what may be going on there. And I definitely know what you're talking about. The way Gege drew some of that, it definitely looks like flames, or at least that type of effect. But for my money, I don't think Yuji has done anything with the furnace in terms of the domain. My best guess would be that it's just representative of cursed energy. Like if you look at when Yuji's about to hit that black flash, his fist looks like it's on fire, but it's not. That's just like the cursed energy surging in it. So I would imagine that's the same thing happening on Sukuna, but honestly, I don't know, and it could be really anything until we actually find out more about what's going on with his domain. But I do assume that the sure hit effect is just like the cleave and dismantle targeted at his soul to try and free Megumi. Next up, we have a super generous donation from I Love Waffles. So thank you so much for that, man. And I too love waffles. In the great waffle versus pancake debate, I am team waffle. Now, I love pancakes before anybody starts yelling at me in the comments, but the would you rather, if you can never have another pancake in your life or never have another waffle in your life, I'm going team waffle. I'll never have another pancake if that's what it takes. So y'all can argue with the wall. That is the correct answer. But anyways, I Love Waffles wants to know, or doesn't want to know, first says I should get into Chainsaw Man, which a lot of you people have been recommending that to me recently. And, you know, like I said, I got a list of things I plan on checking out and potentially covering. Chainsaw Man is definitely on that list. It's not at the very, very top, but it's kind of right below the very top choices I have right now. I definitely plan on checking it out, so I'll at least do that. Whether I'll cover it or not probably depends on how much I like it. Next, he asked, what do I think about the possibility of getting an extra long final chapter? I mean, I hope so. I would love if all the rest of these 4 chapters were longer than normal, like hopefully at least 15 to 17 pages. If we got 20 or 20 plus, that would be incredible. How I think a longer final chapter would affect the story, I don't really think like it would mean anything for the story necessarily, except just more room to breathe for whatever like the final resolution or come down is, epilogue, yada, 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 right? So yeah, the more the merrier. I hope we get, 50 pages for all 4 of these last chapters, but we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if the final chapter was a little bit longer, just like, some of the first chapters of series are much longer than the average chapter. Next, it says, what would your ideal continuation, prequel, or spin-off look like? I would take anything, to be honest. I don't have something in mind where I'm like, oh, I hope it's this. Obviously, getting more about the Heian era would be incredible. Like you mentioned, not focusing on like the 3 big families would be really cool. Whether it was in like Toji's era, kind of pre-Gojo, like pre-hidden inventory, or even like way before that, like kind of how they came into power, even not even in the Heian era necessarily, but maybe even earlier than that, or later, like after Heian, like post Sukuna, but before modern era. I mean, I'm yapping here. Any time in the JJK world, I would be happy to return to, and a sequel, of course, as well. Which what that would be about is obviously going to be dependent on how these last 4 chapters go, but more JJK, I would be here for. I really love this world and its world building, so GG, give me more. And finally, which fights am I most excited to see animated? I mean, it's easy. Gojo Sukuna. I think that's going to break the internet when it happens. Probably rightfully so. Let's just make sure the animators have like a living working condition and, humane hours, but I'm very excited for that. And just like you mentioned here, Hikari versus Kashimo would probably be my number 2. And then, of course, just the entire Sukuna gauntlet, even post Gojo. That's all just going to be so insane. Next up, we got a longer one from Fried Hot Wings and Waffles and Hot Wings. You guys are just speaking my language, but y'all pause to read the whole thing. But what Hot Wings is essentially saying is, what if Rika is the one to teach Sukuna about love? And he makes some really good points, primarily the fact that Yuta and Rika's entire theme is love, right? So it would make sense in that regard, certainly. But I would say, for my money, I think Yuji makes the most sense still, just because he is the MC. He does represent like kind of the stark contrast of everything that Sukuna represents. And you could make that same argument about Yuta as well. But especially in the most recent chapters, we know that Yuta tried to become a monster in order to defeat Sukuna. And I think that was explicitly incorrect. Like, that's not going to get the job done for the same reason Gojo couldn't get the job done. So I feel like Yuji actually being successful, I'm hoping there's like these added layers to the ideological battle that Yuji is winning, which is kind of why he is triumphant, right? Because he is working with all of these other people, and together they have defeated Sukuna. So we'll see if this lesson like explicitly directly comes into play, like Gege spells it out for us. So I do think Yuji makes the most sense for now, but I'm not opposed to this idea, and I do think Gege could do it in a way that I would like. But I would still say Yuji and then Gojo would be my first 2 candidates, probably then followed up by Rika/Yuta. Next up, we got several questions from Daniel, so let's run through these one by one. The first being, are all curse techniques inherited, or can you learn some of them? And no, they are all inherited, at least when we talk about specifically curse techniques. There is obviously some jujutsu that you can learn even if you don't have a curse technique, but you must be born with it. The only exception being weird cases like with what's going on with Yuji. But where you reference Nobara learning from her grandmother, that's only because her grandmother happened to have the exact same curse technique. So she was able to like tutor Nobara in it because they both shared that, right? Similar to how, the Zenin clan has a guidebook on 10 shadows that Megumi could learn from because that's a technique that's existed before in the clan. So yeah, you must inherit a curse technique. You can't just learn it. Then the second question is, who is Panda's sister? And this one's a bit longer, so y'all can pause to read it. But Daniel basically draws this comparison between Panda and Shinji from Evangelion, because Gege said that Principal Yaga was based off of the dad or whatever his name was from Evangelion. And I actually didn't even know that, so this is a cool little parallel. I'm not sure how deep it goes and if we'll ever find out for sure, unless somebody asks Gege about this. But the sister is the Triceratops, and I think the whole statement about like whoever sees my sister dies is a statement to her power, but I think it's more so just like any time the Triceratops personality came out, whoever they were fighting died, and less a like definitive power stance of like this thing is omega powerful and can kill anyone, if that makes sense. So I think really it was just an showcase of how strong Kashimo was, that he was able to just destroy the sister without her even doing anything. Next up, Daniel's third question deals with the one will live or one will die scenario, of which I've talked about a lot, so I'm not going to like re-yap about it here, but he does bring up the interesting point of perhaps Yuji has technically already died, as has Nobara and as has Gojo, even though we know Yuji and Nobara are clearly alive and kicking now. So could some weird nuance with like technically dying come into play? And we'll just have to see. I think there are a lot of possibilities for how those endings could shake out. Again, assuming Gege still even does that. Next, Daniel's fourth question deals with the 10 Shadows user and the Limitless Six Eyes user that fought to the death back in the past that Gojo was telling Megumi about. Daniel says that he thinks it was probably a teen Six Eyes user and a 10 Shadows user who had fully mastered his curse technique, and that's why, the Limitless Six Eyes user didn't just make short work of them. And then as for my thoughts on this fight, so I think that it was clearly a, if not teen, just somebody not as talented as Gojo. Like, I think he is the strongest Limitless Six Eyes user ever. I've made a video on that before. So I just think, whether he was a teen or a full-grown adult, I just don't think he was as good as Gojo. And then as far as the 10 Shadows user, I don't know what you meant by mastered necessarily, but we know that no one has ever tamed Maharaga, right? So we essentially know what happened is that Maharaga was summoned in a subjugation ritual, and most likely Maharaga is the one that killed both the 10 Shadows user and the Limitless Six Eyes user. So maybe the Gojo clan member didn't have enough information on what Maharaga could do and didn't realize that the adaptations were happening and he would quickly run out of weapons. Maybe this Limitless user didn't know purple, right? Maybe he didn't have RCT for all we know. So I think that regardless of how old they were or how experienced they were, clearly they just weren't on the same level as, what Gojo has achieved and clearly what Sukuna has achieved. Next, Daniel's fifth question has to do with the 10 Shadows domain expansion and wonders if it was meant to be like a barrierless domain, and that might be why Megumi hadn't fully mastered it yet. And for my money, no, I don't think any domain would be like inherently barrierless, just because I think that is the next step in like Jujutsu genius to be able to conceive of and pull off a barrierless domain. So I do think the 10 Shadows domain would still be like a normal barriered domain, and it would just be a matter of like being good enough to then take it to a barrierless state. And then Daniel's final question here has to deal with the version of Sukuna's domain that we saw towards the end of the fight, where he used Gojo's hand sign and, had the new pathway to the domain thanks to Black Flash. Daniel says it was an incomplete domain, which I think you mean just like because it had the restrictions, like it only had the 99-second timer and it looked different. I don't know if I would call that an incomplete domain necessarily, but just not his full capacity domain due to binding vows and stuff. Now, do I think that's because of Megumi's soul was used instead of Sukuna's own body? And I'd say probably not. I think that's really just representative of all of the damage Sukuna has taken thus far. The infinite void damaging his brain, his curse technique technique being on burnout, right? All of the black flashes from Yuji lowering his output, yada, yada, yada. So I think Sukuna was just forced to, in that moment, in order to cast the domain, he had to make those binding vows, had to make the new pathway. And so that's why it initially, at least, needed that 99-second timer, because he just wasn't at 100% and able to cast the domain the way he normally would. So I don't think it really had anything to do with Megumi. And then finally, man, the honor has been all mine. Next up, Joshua says, for the dedication and great videos, man, appreciate it. And my gosh, dude, I appreciate you. Like I just mentioned, I am honored to even have an audience that I can yap about this with. So thank you so much, man. Next up, we've got another Chainsaw Man recommendation from Hubot here. And like I mentioned, a lot of you have been recommending this, so I will at the very least check it out. Now, if I'll actually cover it on the channel or not, I would say boils down to probably like 3 things. The first being that I enjoy it, right? The second being that there is stuff to talk about. Like there is depth to go into, whether it's like a literary analysis or world building or whatever. Like if there's stuff to actually make content about, that's important, right? And then the third is that that's what you guys would want to see, right? There would actually be an audience for it. So like I said, there seems to be a demand for Chainsaw Man, so we will at least check it out. Next up, we got this question from Lord Flack, who says, Sukuna said in 267 that Yuji's punches are having an effect on him that don't allow him to heal with reverse curse technique. So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding here. I know what part you're talking about, but I think what Sukuna was saying is that Yuji like hasn't even had time to do reverse curse technique. It's the moment where Sukuna is saying like, I'm not losing here, like you're in over your head. So I think he was just mentioning that like Yuji hasn't even been healing himself, and not that the punches were like preventing healing or anything like that. Next up, we got a long one from Gabo here that has his theory on Yuji's domain expansion, and so y'all pause to read this first half, but then we've also got a second part as well. And here is the rest. So essentially what he's talking about is just this nuance of Yuji's domain, how there are the locations around Japan, how there was non-violence at first, and how this could be the benevolent shrine. And basically I completely agree with you. If you didn't see my video I put out a couple days ago, I talk about the potential binding vow similar to what you referenced, that there is this chance that Yuji offers, this mercy, this compassion, and then and only then when that's turned down, like the real domain comes into play, like we saw here. So yeah, I pretty much agree with this take. And then finally for this video, we got this amazing question from 844K, who says, Gege missed out on one of the most hilarious moments by having Choso and Todo meet and interact. Based on their personality, how do I think that would go? And what would Choso's answer to Todo's famous question be? And like you mentioned, Choso's type is Yuki. I mean, they definitely had a little flirtatious vibe going on, you know, before they both violently died. But I think Yuki is absolutely Choso's type in his answer to that question, should he be presented with it. And for how they would get along, I think there would first be some friction, primarily because of the fact that Choso is kind of getting flirty with Todo's mentor, but also because of how they both view Yuji as a brother, and maybe they wouldn't like that somebody else felt that way too. But I do think that would only be like an initial tension, some funny moments as that's first investigated. But I quickly think they would realize that they were all very genuine in their brotherhood, and then they could all kind of unite on that. Anyways, y'all, that's all for this one. Thank you guys so much for sending in your support and your questions. It means the world to me, and thank you guys so much for watching.